ediyoruz. Değerli konuklar şimdi konuşmalarını yapmak üzere Dünya Bankası Avrupa, Orta Asya ve Türkiye Direktörü Sayın Martin Reiser'ı kürsüye davet ediyorum.
Sayın Bakanım, Sayın TÜRKONFED Başkanı Süleyman Bey, Sayın TÜSİAD Başkanı Johnson Hanım, davetiniz için çok teşekkür ederim. Maalesef benim Türkçe çok az. Bunun için benim prezentasyon İngilizce devam ediyorum. So I would like to say a very warm word of thanks for this invitation. This is a very impressive gathering when you look at just the number of members that TÜRKONFED is able to bring together under one roof. This is very impressive, and it makes me very optimistic about the future of the business world in Turkey and about the future of the relations between civil society and public authorities in this country. I would like to not keep you very long from coffee, but I was asked to say a few words on the topic of the subsequent panel. And I want to do that by drawing together the lessons of some of the recent reports that we have prepared. So the topic of my talk will be regional development and urbanization. It will have two parts. The first to talk about the successes, and the second to talk about the challenges. And then I will say a few words about what I think Turkey can learn from its own success and from the experience of other countries on how to address the challenges. So when you look at urbanization experiences worldwide, this is what you see. You see that, except for South Korea, Turkey is the fastest urbanizing country in the world. This matters a lot for regional development, as I will show you in a minute, but it matters for all sorts of other reasons as well. It has major implications for the structure of families, major implications for the relationship between men and women, major implications for economic development, major implications for access to services, etc., etc. China is now catching up, but as you can see on the graph, there's quite a few countries in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, as well as in South Asia, India most prominently, that have not benefited from quite the same motor and dynamism of urbanization as Turkey has. Traditionally, Turkey's population was concentrated along the coast. This is a map where the mountains represent population. And this is what Turkey looks like if the population centers are scaled in height by the size of their population. Turkey essentially has around 6 mountains, one very, very big one, which is Istanbul, and then a few not so big ones, which are Ankara, Bursa, Izmir, Antalya, and Gaziantep. All of these, with the exception of Ankara, are located on the coast or very close to the coast. This is because from there it was much easier to reach world markets. So people go to cities that have better connectivity with the world economy. Ankara is an exception because Ankara was the capital. But recently, Turkey's secondary cities have grown much faster. In a recent book of ours, which looks at Turkey's urbanization experience, we call this the rise of the Anatolian tigers. This chart shows you how the population of major metropolitan areas in Turkey has changed between 2000 and 2010. And you can see that now the biggest mountain is actually in Gaziantep. But there are quite a few other mountains inside from the coastal areas. There are a number of other statistics I could show you, but it all points to the same thing. The biggest urbanization push in the last 10 years has not been in Istanbul, it has not been in Izmir, and to some extent it has not been in Ankara. It has really been in cities like Gaziantep, Kayseri, Konya, but even Urfa and further in Anatolia. When you look at where have enterprises been created, you see a very similar picture. This is the spatial distribution of employment created in newly created enterprises. It comes from the top database. And you can see how, in this case, the mountains are distributed all over the map. It is not the case that enterprises are only creating new jobs in places such as Istanbul or Izmir or indeed Ankara. They are creating new jobs all over the place. Because of this, Turkey's cities have been drivers both of economic growth and regional convergence. The first one is not usually appreciated very well. The second one is not usually known. On the first chart to the left, you can see the relationship between increases in GDP per capita and increases in the share of the population living in cities. And you can see that there is not a very clear relationship at all. There are countries such as Gabon, or Saudi Arabia, or Oman, or Jordan, and a number of others, where the number of people living in cities has increased dramatically as a share of the population. And yet, GDP per capita has not increased very much. You also find countries, mostly in developed Western European OECD countries, where GDP per capita has increased substantially, but they are no longer experiencing further urbanization. What is interesting for the comparison of Turkey are countries that are rapidly urbanizing and increasing GDP per capita. Those are countries that are typically at a rapid stage of structural transformation, with people moving from the countryside to the cities, finding more productive jobs, and lifting the incomes of the entire country. This is not self-evident, but it has happened in Turkey over the last 2-3 decades, and this is very important. But because, as I was showing you, the cities that have grown more rapidly recently are not the largest cities of Turkey in the West, but the cities in Anatolia, there is actually a process of regional convergence in per capita incomes happening in Turkey over the last decade. This is something that Minister Şimşek pointed out in his presentation, but it is not widely appreciated in Turkey's discussion. What is much more emphasized is the fact that the inequalities are very large. What I would like to point to is that the inequalities have been decreasing, and the reason for that is the structural transformation of the cities in Turkey's eastern provinces as a result of the processes that I mentioned. The services sector plays a particularly important role. This is a chart that comes from a comparative study of cities that the World Bank has commissioned from a consulting company. And it shows you the value added per worker in various industries and compares them across important metropolitan areas. And what is interesting is that when you compare cities such as Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, or Shanghai with Ankara, Izmir, and Istanbul, you can see that differences in productivity in manufacturing are not very large. The biggest differences come from differences in the productivity of services. This is the area where most of the jobs in Turkey have recently been created. And this is a big part of how regional convergence can happen and how urbanization can contribute to improved per capita incomes. So what did Turkey do? I'm going to go rather quickly because you know this better than me. There are 3 points that I want to make. The first is connectivity is really important. When you look at where cities, where urban agglomerations have formed, they settle along the railway lines constructed by Ataturk in the 1930s. Secondly, the municipal law of 1984 created a regime that allowed cities such as Istanbul or Ankara or Kocaeli or Izmir to be managed as municipalities. You may think that this is evident. It is not. Cities such as Cairo or Manila, or until quite recently London, were not managed as municipalities, and as a result, much more difficult to create urban services, to do sensitive planning, and to manage the cities effectively. This regime has been successful in Turkey and has recently been extended. We can have a debate about whether that extension has yet shown its results or whether it needs to be further modified. But the fact is, the municipal regime allowing cities to be managed as one whole is an important part of the success of urbanization. Mr. Šimšek has already mentioned the shift of investments across the spatial dimension. Public investment has moved to the lagging regions, and that has helped these regions in their process of convergence. This is a chart that shows you where public investment in education has gone between 2001 and 2011. You can see how it's shifted east. You would see the same with roads and airports and other elements of public infrastructure. So this is the good story. And some of you will say, great, a good story, a positive story from the World Bank. I like telling good stories about Turkey because I think Turkey deserves credit. But we can't stop here. We have to mention the challenges. So let's look at the disparities across provinces in health or in education. Minister Šimšek showed us average school enrollment ratios. But it is quite shocking to see that the enrollment ratio in secondary education, for instance in Van province, is less than 30%. It is also quite shocking to see the differences in number of hospital beds per 100,000 people across provinces in Turkey. So investment has shifted east, and that's a very good thing. But to allow the East to catch up in terms of access to public services with a quality of life that people enjoy in Istanbul is still quite a way off. The same point can be made in the financial sector. Credit as a share of value added is over 50% in Istanbul and well over 40% in Ankara, but it is only about 10 to 12% in Van, Muş, Bitlis, and Hakkari. Without access to credit, it is very difficult for enterprises in those parts of the country to develop dynamically. You see this reflected also in electricity consumption. The differences between provinces here are more than 8 times. And you see it again in the share of the population served by water supply networks in municipalities. Again, in the less developed areas of Turkey, more than 10%, 10 to 12% of the population do not have access to water supply, which means they get their water from pumps and they don't have access to good sanitation. To these regional inequalities that are structural in nature and come from a long period of historical differences comes the unequal regional burden of hosting the Syrian refugees. The less developed provinces of the southeast bear by far the largest burden of the refugee, hosting a large refugee population. Cities such as Gaziantep or Şanlıurfa or Hatay province have well over 100,000 refugees within their provincial boundaries. This is data this is registration data of refugees that don't live in camps. We don't know whether these data are fully accurate. There may be more. And municipalities, finally, are not very well equipped to deal and address these multiple challenges, because the poorer a municipality is, the less its tax revenues are going to be, and the less its per capita municipal expenditures are going to be. Now, this doesn't matter so much in Turkey because a lot of the spending, even at the local level, comes from centralized budget allocations through the ministries in Ankara. But it may be a problem because it does not allow municipalities to react fully to the challenges that they face in their particular locality. Turkey does not have a very expansive system of intergovernmental fiscal transfers. And that limits the ability of municipalities to address these local challenges. We believe that Turkey would do well to expand the system of interregional transfers against the system for improving the monitoring and control over regional government expenditures. So let me close with a few lessons from Turkey and from international experience of what could be done to improve further the reduction of regional inequalities and, as a result, benefit from the opportunities that regional convergence would give in terms of improving the quality of life for everyone in Turkey. The lesson number one from Turkey, which other countries should learn, is allow people to migrate where economic opportunities are. Do not try to bring economic opportunities to where people are. Allow people to move where the opportunities are. Much cheaper, much more effective, largely what Turkey has done. A lot of other countries have not tried to do that, and they have failed. Second, public spending is really critical to ensure spatial equity in the access to basic services. So the fact that investment has moved east is a good thing. This needs to continue. Third, Turkey knows itself better than anyone else, and they're not going to need the World Bank to remind Turkey of this. Complete the peace process to attract investment into those areas most affected by the continued insecurity as a result of civil disturbance. My visits to that part of the country suggest there are lots of you in this room waiting to invest money if they have the certainty that peace is there to stay. But there are a couple of lessons from international experience with which I would like to close my brief presentation today. The first is that Turkey could do more to decentralize responsibility for service delivery and to match this with greater fiscal autonomy and spatial equalization transfers. It is not entirely clear to me why Turkey could not have a block grant mechanism where the government says we want municipalities to have the resources to address challenges such as the refugee crisis or the planning for disasters, earthquakes, or other kinds of very localized challenges. And we're not going to tell them from Ankara how to spend every one of those Turkish lira. We're going to give you a block grant and we will monitor what you have done with it, but we're not going to centrally allocate every one of those liras. It will give huge benefit to local authorities, but also to the local business community to shape the destiny of their own region. And because you live there, you know much better than people in a central capital what is really needed and where the priorities are. Turkey is not very far advanced in this regard and could make a big step forward, I believe, in the next decade, very much to the benefit of further improving regional convergence. So let me stop here. Just thank you once again for this invitation. Thank you for giving me a chance to share some observations with you on the challenges of regional development and urbanization. Remember, this is a positive story by and large, but it is a story that is not yet finished. And I hope that all of you together, and maybe in partnership with the World Bank, will write the second chapter. Thank you so much for your attention.
Sayın Razor'a teşekkür ediyoruz. Genel kurulumuz bir kahve molasından sonra devam edecek.